Welcome to episode 1 of the Innerlogic Culture Series, where great ideas come together. This episode features executive performance coach Jason Seeley. Jason consults with organizations like Loblaws, Shoppers Drug Mart, NAV Canada, Queen's School of Business, the REACH Project, Ryerson Athletics, and many more, if you can believe it. We were honored Jason would join us for episode 1 of our series, and we hope you enjoy. As I mentioned in the introduction, Jason describes himself as an executive performance coach. So I wanted to find out what exactly he does, why organizations bring him into the fold, and what those pain points are for them that they just can't seem to solve internally.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it depends on the organization. Some organizations are looking for you to have an immediate impact by changing some type of pervasive and prevalent issue that's been going on forever, and they want you to come in and change it and fix it. I think through the evolution of working, I've started to shy away from that type of work because there's no quick fix to big problems. These things take time. Some organizations really appreciate the opportunity to evolve and grow to what they're calling a learning culture. To adopting a coaching culture. Organizations are really thinking in terms of a developmental bias, how do we develop our people? And those are the types of organizations that keep me around for the long haul. They want me as part of a journey to continuously help them evolve, to better develop their people. And the reasons why they need to develop their people is that it's expensive to go through. It's expensive to hire someone, onboard them, train them, and then after a year or two, if they're not performing, fire them and then hire somebody else to do and go through the same process. In the aviation world, it costs $1 million to train someone from ab initio, what they call ab initio. So someone's just off the street, they just started their training, to getting a license. That's a 2-year process. It costs $1 million to do that. So if you get halfway through the process and they're not successful, think about that, $500,000 down the chute, because we weren't able to be effective at developing our people. So there's a cost to not being able to develop people. I'll also work with some smaller boutique organizations in Toronto where, there may be a staff of under 20 people, and they're not able to pay. They're not able to pay what big consulting firms would pay or big marketing agents would pay their staff. So they're really relying on, that person who's 1 or 2 years out of university, who they can hire as a coordinator, and they can develop them into an account manager and account director. And that whole journey takes about 5 years, and them holding that person for 5 years. They give that person a lot of responsibility and a lot of title and low pay in some cases. But it's incumbent on those organizations to be able to develop, because they're not going to be able to pull someone who's fully formed and pay a fully formed person to stay with the organization. So those organizations are really, really buying into the whole idea of we have to develop our people, a developmental bias, and making sure that they've got a coaching approach to their leadership to make sure that they're developing those people and retaining them and getting the most out of them.
So Jason talked about the cost of people development. He also touched on the cost of culture and the value of taking a coaching approach to leadership. These are all things that we're obviously really big on at Innerlogic. So I wanted to find out more about what signals or indicators show an organization that a person or a team just isn't working out or aligning with their culture.
Good question. A couple things. So results are always usually the first yellow flag. So, an organization, a team not meeting its KPIs. Maybe those KPIs are related to sales. Often in the business world, they're related to revenue generation. In the sport world, it would be in basketball in particular, there's a certain amount of rebounds we need you to get, or a certain amount of points. I think all coaches have an idea of what different individual contributors need to contribute for the team to be successful. So if those things aren't happening, then okay, there's a yellow flag. I think that so results are one thing. what I'm noticing in the business world and in the sport world is the metacognitive skills. What I mean by the metacognitive skills, it's a person's own responsibility to drive their own development. So when coaches or employers see someone stagnating, they're not growing. We've given them this feedback though. We've told them they need to get better at this, or maybe we haven't, and they just haven't, they don't want it enough, or they're not bought in. I mean, that's some of the language that we hear. Really what that comes down to is that individual, for some reason, not driving and accelerating their own growth. And that's when we get into those metacognitive skills. And Dane Jensen of performance coaching, he really qualified these really well a few years ago at a breakfast I was at with him. He bucketed them into 3 buckets. The first bucket is seeing clearly. So seeing clearly is a person's ability to assess their own performance. What are my strengths? What are my limitations? What was my overall performance there? That's half of the seeing clearly. The other half of the seeing clearly is really like curiosity and seeking feedback. What feedback did I get from my coaches or from the environment or from the leaders or other people on the team? That's the first step, but that's not good enough on its own. The next step is about moving quickly. And Dane, talked about this bucket of moving quickly. So now I have this information. Great. What do I do with it? Well, I've got to be creative about practicing these things. And this is where deliberate practice, the idea of deliberate practice comes in, and creative about how I deliberately practice it, because I may not, like in a sport example, I may not be able to practice my 3-point shooting in a game. I have to find other ways to do it. So maybe I do it in an individual session with an assistant coach, or I do it on my own with the shooting gun. In the in the aviation world, maybe I go into the simulator to practice certain things, to practice my phraseology, or to practice coordination, because I can't just practice it deliberately when I'm on the job, because the situation may not call for it. But I've got to be creative about what are different ways that I can practice this skill so that I can show up better the way I want to show up when it's game time. And then the last piece is around staying the course. So we know that anytime that we step outside of our comfort zone and we put these new ideas into action, we stretch ourselves, it's uncomfortable, right? Like we feel that visceral discomfort of just not being sure of what we're doing and not feeling confident, and we're just in that stretch zone.
It sounds like identifying the right people is a huge advantage when it comes to culture building. So I was really curious, how do you find the right people?
So I interviewed for a company years ago, and they asked me to present some of their work to them. So there's about 6 or 8 people in the panel. They said, we want you to present this module of our work to us. I presented it to them, and they gave me a whole bunch of feedback. The second interview, they asked me to present an original work to them. And I presented it to them in the second interview, but what I also did is I also incorporated the feedback that they'd given me after I presented the first module. So after I presented the second module, what they told me was, they said, what we were really looking for is we were looking to see whether you would incorporate the feedback from the first time that you presented into the second time that you presented without us having to tell you this. They were onboarding and recruiting for meta skills, for these metacognitive skills, without asking you questions about it. They put you in this real life simulation of it and just wanted to see how you responded. So these are some of the things I start to work with organizations on, because try to help organizations be clear on, look, if you're the people who hired these people. So if you hired them, and there's obviously a reason why you hired them, is it that the individual is flawed, as you're saying, or is it that our onboarding or our development process was flawed? So if we hired good people, then it probably means that our developmental process is flawed.
Okay, so let's say you get the right people on the bus. Now what? I wanted to hear from Jason's experiences. How do the best leaders actually build high-performance culture on a daily basis? What do they actually do?
It's just, the leader just has this understanding of what seems to make things work. They understand that, people need to feel a level of psychological safety in their environment. They need to feel like they're They can ask questions. They can present insights. They can make mistakes and not be crushed for those mistakes. People need to know what their job is for them to be dependable. They need to know, okay, what do I need to do here every day to be dependable, and they need to get feedback on that so that they can refine their competence in those areas and be more dependable. And then for that to happen, then there needs to be structure and clarity. There's I think it's Peter Jensen might have said it, like, imagery is the language of performance. So if you can see it, you stand that much of a better chance to be able to do it. So people have to see what success looks like, and there must be the structures in place to facilitate that success. People need to find some meaning in the work. So maybe the work in itself is fantastic. There's some work I'm doing with the REACH project at University of Toronto, and they're doing this international research of reaching the hard to reach in developmental countries. So think about how do you successfully execute an Ebola eradication strategy in a country where you don't even know where new people are born. Like, people are living in such a rural community in this country that you don't even know when they're born. They don't have birth certificates. So how do you facilitate this type of a process when, how do you reach the hard to reach in these circumstances? That work of itself, for the people who are participating, is so meaningful. Then there's people who, you connect with, who their job is to, clean the toilets in the organization, right? What's the meaning? Well, the meaning for them is, my job is to make sure this place is perfectly clean, and there's, especially in this COVID situation, this COVID world, that there's no disease, there's no bacteria, and I take ownership and I take pride in that. Or my job pays for me to put food on the table and a roof over my head for my family. So that's the meaning. Whatever the meaning is, just making sure that it connects with people, and then finally that people feel like they're having an impact on what's going on. They feel like they're contributing. Their work matters, and I think people are more engaged when they feel like their work matters.
So these examples got me really excited, because the innerlogic platform actually uses some of the research from Google's Project Aristotle to measure team behaviors. But what if Jason goes in somewhere and the current culture doesn't reflect any of these behaviors? Where do you start? I told Jason that I read an article recently that suggested that to change a culture, the first thing you have to do is unfreeze or thaw the old culture. So I asked Jason, is this where he starts? Does he try and unfreeze what's currently going on? And if this is where he starts, how do you execute that unfreezing process?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that it happens that deliberately in stages. Like, first we're unfreezing, and then we are sort of remodeling things, and then we're going to try to refreeze. I think it all happens simultaneously. But the unfreezing part is funny, because what I'm hearing there is, there's a few models of organizational change. Cotter's model, he's like a 8-step model of organizational change. And the first step is, I think the first 3 steps are around the whole concept of unfreezing. So where I'll usually ask organizational leaders, like, why is there an urgency to change? Like, what is it about the current state of affairs that requires us to need to change? Because I think if you're going to unfreeze, you've got to give people a reason to unfreeze. So, the story that I communicated to you with NAV Canada in particular, and I put dollars and cents to it, that's the reason why the organization wants to unfreeze, because that's a huge price to pay, and they're paying that out, a lot. The challenge then becomes, can we make that statistic relevant to the people you're trying to move? So it's one thing for the organization to look at this and say, look, we're losing, if we're only qualifying half of the people who are training, and we get people halfway through the training each time, we're losing $500,000 a pop. That's a lot for the organization to absorb. But if I'm a frontline worker, or I'm a coach, why do I care? I still get paid on the 1st and 15th of every month. So we have to now be able to frame the urgency to change on things that are relevant and meaningful for the people you are serving. So in that situation, as a frontline worker or as a air traffic controller, well, if we don't train new people, we don't get new people on board, your unit is going to shrink. So the people who are working in your specialty is going to shrink. You will be working incredible amounts of overtime, which was actually a good thing for a lot of old controllers. They loved working the overtimes. They got paid a ton of money, and controllers do quite well. The challenge now with the newer controllers is they actually want their time back. They're like the new generation of I don't know if it's Generation Z or X. I'm not sure what generation we're in right now, but people who, yeah, they want to put in a good day's work, but they also want their time to go traveling and spend time with their family and enjoy the things that fill their cup. So for those people, it's about communicating. Okay, the urgency to change is that if we don't, you're not going to have that time to go out on your boat or to go traveling around the world or spend time. So that becomes part of the technique to support the unfreezing, is making that urgency to change relevant, not just to the organization, but also to the people who are on the team. So finding ways to find what is important for those people on the team, and then being able to communicate the urgency to change through that lens.
Okay, so it sounds like unfreezing a culture requires a common sense of urgency among the group. That's a really important point. So let's say you have that, and Jason as a consultant is in a company helping a team learn and grow and build their culture. I wanted to learn more about what he actually does. Like, what facilitation strategies, what tools does he use to take a team from, say, a 6 out of 10 to a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10? What is he actually doing? What does that look and feel like when he's with a group?
So I would say, I don't think there's one thing. And I think this is where sport really has it nailed, in the sense that one of the ways, so when we're talking about psychological safety, I want just people to feel safe to, hey, share an insight and do their best and know that they're not going to get crushed by a team member for making a mistake. We want people to feel comfortable giving feedback, things like that. And that really, for people to feel most comfortable doing that, a couple of things have to happen. We need to start to build relationships between team members. So I think I was on a coaching community call the other day, and the word team building came out, and there's some pro coaches on that call, and they were like, team building, that's overrated and it gets inauthentic. And I don't disagree with them. I think that language has gotten played out a little bit, but I think what we're trying to do is create relationships and pipelines between players so that they feel comfortable having conversations with each other. They feel comfortable exchanging with each other and influencing each other. So to that, I think that, with sport, it's like the athletes are together on the bus or on the flight. They're together in the team room or through practices, and then it's film and study. If it's a university environment, it's study hall, and there's just so many opportunities for them to interact and exchange information that facilitates like self-other overlap. So what are the things that we have in common? And I think those things that we have in common tend to be, and I'm pulling from positive psychology now, that self-other overlap now tends to be those avenues of connection, right? Those ways that if I didn't know someone, if I'm a rookie coming in and there's a third or fourth year player, well, if I didn't feel connected with them before, now that I realize, oh my gosh, we're from the same hometown, right? Or both of our grandparents come from this country, or we both do this for Thanksgiving, or we love to wear our socks a certain way, whatever it might be. Those become some of the connection points. But I feel like sport teams, there's just so many opportunities to create those connections just through the natural flow of a team. And then now, in the college and university environment in particular, coaches are being even more proactive about finding other ways to create connection and togetherness. So it's not just the connection togetherness is not just the byproduct of the amount of time that the team spends together on the bus or in practice and things like that. Now they're bringing in facilitators like myself and like someone like Danielle Dobney, or even like yourself, who will facilitate an activity and trying to accelerate that connection. I personally love to focus on activities that facilitate that self-other overlap. Like getting us to know a little bit more about each other on a depth level so that we can find the things that we have in common to help us to feel more comfortable with each other so that we can have more meaningful conversations to then solve problems on the court, on the pitch, on the field in real time. But I really feel like, I don't think there's one thing. I think there's so much that needs to be done, but I think there has to be an intention around team development by the leaders. I think that, I use this analogy all the time. I think in sport, the same way that we practice our systems and we practice shooting and read and react and different technical, tactical aspects of the game, I think we have to practice teaming and practice relationship building wherever possible, because I feel like whatever you practice, you get good at. So it can be separate facilitations, but it can also be really zoning in on, it's a practice. We notice these things all the time. Two people or teams trying to execute something. They're not able to execute it, and you'll notice maybe you'll see body language from one of the team members, like, you should have caught that pass, or you should have flared instead of rolling on that screen, or whatever it might be. But we don't see a conversation happen. We don't see an exchange of information. We don't see one person trying to help their teammate be more competent. We just see one person reacting to how they're feeling about the situation. So those are the times, and I love being at practices and observing that, standing there and observing and kind of saying, okay, let's see if this person communicates in time with their teammate, or let's see if they communicate the next dead ball with their teammate. Let's see if there's any, okay, you got it next time, or here's what we need to do. Let's see if there's any opportunity to connect and correct. And so it can be a facilitation, bringing a third party in, or it can be just paying attention in the moment to those types of opportunities for people to connect as a team. And I think those are just as valuable as bringing somebody in and facilitating some activities.
I'm sure tons of organizations would love to have someone like Jason around all the time, helping them build culture. But that's just not reality. And research actually indicates that changing the environment is the most sustainable way to create behavior change in your people. There's even studies out there showing that where you put the coffee maker can improve connectivity and improve production as a result. So I asked Jason, has he helped organizations implement any environmental changes that he's seen really help them improve their culture and improve their environment? As he answers this question, you're going to hear him refer to someone named Carly. And just for your context, he's referring to Carly Clark, who's the head coach of the Ryerson women's basketball team, the assistant coach on our women's national team. And I've had the great pleasure of working with Carly for a number of years now with the national team. She's amazing. But what I really love is Jason's ability to make connections between sport and business.
Yeah, great question. And I think I'll focus more on changes that we can make in how we do things, because they're less expensive, that influence that environment. So you mentioned, you brought up meetings. I think one of the ways I've been able to really influence a lot of clients who weren't intentional about this before is just getting the idea of huddles. We call them huddles. So this is me bringing sport language in to their environment. So it can be a weekly huddle. It can be a project-based huddle. But just like at the start of a sport practice, it's creating that environment where, hey, let's get organized on what's the practice going to look like? Here's the practice plan. Here's what success looks like today. Well, bringing that to a corporate environment, we huddle at the beginning of the week and say, here's what success is going to look like this week. And it opens up the environment for different contributors to share. It can also, and I'm going to take this from Carly, because I've heard Carly use this language, which I've completely stolen from her, because I think it's so awesome to create that environment. We can also put in different questions for our team to think about that starts to create our culture and our environment. So sometimes Carly will ask the question, what are you struggling with? She'll ask the question and then she'll say, here's what I'm struggling with right now. And it's not pointed at anyone. She's talking about something that she's deliberately working on right now. as part of her own development, something that she's maybe in that conscious competent mode. She's just outside of her comfort zone and struggling to learn this and get better at it. And she's completely authentic and completely honest with it. But I feel like sharing those types of things that you as a leader are struggling with and are working on and are imperfect at and are asking for other people's help with, and declaring that to your team, but then giving the team the space to also communicate those types of things is a great way to facilitate that environment of, wow, I guess around here, this is what we talk about, right? In addition to huddles, I'm gonna take from sport environments. Sport is great at debriefing. And sometimes a debrief looks like a conversation at the end of a performance. Sometimes a debrief looks like watching film or just comparing actuals to some of the KPIs. It looks like different things. I think what I've seen from what we do at Queens and we bring to the business world is just a debrief that is facilitated by the coach, but not directed by the coach. So it's, hey, you know what? At the end of this week or at the end of this project, at the end of this event, or at the end of this deliverable, hey guys, what went well? What went well in this deliverable, this event? And it's the coach posing the question and then coach shuts up and listens, right? Or the leader / coach. And then, well, what didn't go well for you? And giving people the space to unpack that. And then, okay, let's talk about the delta. Let's talk about if you had a mulligan and you had a do-over on that whole kind of thing. Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? And helping give people that space to, come up with their own solutions and even play back the certain situations again. These are practices from sport that really start to serve a change of a culture and a change of how we do things around here without even modifying the physical space. And then there's things that happen in corporate communities that have happened for a while, like, offsites and, going for drinks after work that really do speak to how we want to interact. But I think when those things are led by the leaders, it really helps. I think facilitating environments where we deliver feedback. So organizations in the corporate environment, they'll do performance appraisals or performance assessments, performance reviews. What could be even more valuable are peer reviews. So, performance reviews, you sit down with your boss says, okay, here's what the goals are for the year, and here's how I think you did with those things. What about a review where there's an opportunity for people you work with on a day-to-day basis on your sub-team, your cross-functional team, your functional team, to give you feedback and you give them feedback because you guys work together collaboratively more consistently. So those opportunities, like facilitating a safe place to have those opportunities to share that information and making those things the norm, making those types of conversations the norm. That's how we do things around here. We give each other feedback, right? We help each other. Forget we give each other feedback. We help each other to grow, and the way that I help you to grow is, I give you reinforcing feedback when you've done something that aligns with our expectations. And I give you modifying feedback when, you've missed the mark a little bit, but I'm trying to help you to hit the mark, right? So I think being intentional about those things, whether it's in a huddle or it's in some other process, just check-ins with your people. So I've had leaders who, they don't know anything about the people they work with. They know nothing about their team, their staff, and the relationship is quite transactional with their people. I get contacted from some organizations to do executive coaching, and really the person I'm working with, their sole purpose for wanting executive coaching is they want a promotion. They want to move up the line. And I'm fortunate now to not have to accept that work anymore. And I now limit myself to I work with people who are really authentic about supporting their people, and through the support of their people, you'll get recognized, and that will be how you'll move up the line. But I'm not about sort of navigating the politics of a corporate environment, but just even moving the relationship. I might be the identified lead, the coach, but it doesn't mean that we can't know things about each other. It doesn't mean that it's that transactional. So looking for those opportunities to have a 2-minute conversation with your people, and making sure that you've created touch points with each person, and you know something about them and they know something about you. So I think those are some things that start to communicate that these are some things that are expected and create that environment of safety. But then there's also pieces around clarity. So people perform at a high level when they know what's expected of them. So I think organizations, and when I brought that language into corporate organizations and sort of built it out through some examples of what clarity looks like and what it doesn't look like, that's always one that blows people away. And what I mean by clarity is, I mean that people have a clear picture, that we're all on the same page as far as what success looks like, right? We're all on the same page what success looks like. We're all on the same page as far as how we're going to get there, right? And my people, I've been able to explain it in a way that my people get it. So it's one thing for me to have this picture, but it's nothing. My people have to understand it, right? So, and that seems to be a piece that's big. So even having that language and making sure that everyone is really diligent about ensuring that the people that they're working with on the team have the same picture.
I love how aligned Jason's priorities are with our innerlogic metrics. When we were designing this program, we had 50 areas that we initially had kind of targeted, and clarity made it into the final 7 that actually made it into the program. So I wanted to build on this topic of clarity a little bit. I described to Jason a facilitation exercise that I had used with the national team a few years back. And the exercise went like this. Everyone on the team picked a song, and they would get up in front of the team and they were asked to hum that song, and the rest of the team would try and guess what song they were humming as quickly as they could. And for almost everyone who was doing this activity, about halfway through or once they got through the first chorus, they would kind of stop and be like, how haven't you guys got this yet? It's so obvious. They couldn't believe that something that was so clear in their mind was so unclear to the people that they were communicating with. So I shared this exercise with Jason, and luckily enough, Jason had heard of this exercise. He used it himself, and he had some real-life examples of where he applied it.
As a researcher, her name is Elizabeth Newton. She was out of, I think, Stanford University. She had this concept that she popularized through this research experiment called the concept is called the curse of knowledge. So she has like 40 people in a room. She splits the group of 40 into 2 groups. One group is labeled as the tappers. The other group is labeled as the listeners. The tappers' the tappers are given a list of well-known songs, Happy Birthday, Star Spangled Banner, things like that. And their job is to sit across from one of the listeners and tap out the sound of the song in a way that the listener would be able to understand and identify correctly the sound of the song. Before the experiment, they asked the tappers, what do you think the success rate is going to be? And the tappers said they thought the success rate would be 50%. So one of every 2 songs would be correctly identified. So they go through the experiment, and just like your experiment there, they experience the same thing. Someone's, I actually do this as a facilitation. So if it was me, I might pick the Star Spangled Banner kind of thing. In sport, I hear that song a lot. But I wouldn't pick any version of it. I would probably pick, like, for me, what's an iconic version of it, which would be Jimi Hendrix performing the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock. So, I'd sit across from the listener and I start tapping out the sound of this song. But as I'm tapping it out, what I'm seeing in my mind is I'm seeing Jimmy on stage. And, I see Jimmy take his guitar out, and Jimmy starts playing the first few chords. And he goes on, and there's a sea of people at Woodstock, and everyone's wearing tie-dye and their headbands and long hair, and everyone's stoned out of their minds, and it's this incredible scene. It's packed. And this is what I'm seeing as the person tapping it out. This is the picture I've got in my mind. Well, what is the listener getting? So they're like, give me a clue. So I do a facilitation little activity there on that. And it really comes down to trying to do your best to make your communications concrete, make them clear, but making them observable. So what is it that we would see someone do, or what is it that we would hear someone say that would demonstrate, what I'm trying to get someone to do? So if it's like, you know what, I need you guys to work harder, right? What are the observables? Like, what is it I need to see that person do, or what is it I need to hear them say? Like, in sport, we hear it all the time, like, you gotta work harder, or in business, like, you gotta be more bought in. What does that mean? Like, that's not clear. So the more the leaders can break those concepts down into observables that people can jump on board. Like, okay, yeah, I know what it. Be bought in. You want me to be on time at work? Okay, great. That's something I can do. I can buy into that. But just that concept of being more bought in sport, like, we got to work harder. What does that mean? Well, I need you to box out. Like, I need you to go find a body and hit someone while the ball's in flight. Okay, I can do that. So finding ways to make those things more observable helps to create clarity. And that's a big one with leaders. When we unpack those with that whole concept with them, that's like oh yeah, we get that.
So I wanted to close this conversation with a quick hitter that summarized or captured kind of all of the different themes that we had talked about. So I told Jason that I had heard a quote once from a coach that said, if I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 4 of those hours sharpening the axe. And I asked him to build on this and kind of share what he thinks the ratio should be when it comes to development versus the pursuit of results in the business world.
Look, in business, it's about results. So at the end of the day, results matter. Results are what are going to keep things and keep the organization going. But it's like, how do you get those results? So I think the ratio should be closer to, maybe if it's a 6-point scale, it's 3 and 3. And I think that to get sustained results over the long term, I think we have to make a commitment to developing our people. And no one's ever fully formed. So, the results can look even greater down the road if we continue to focus on the development of our people. And it could be the development in terms of what the organization needs from them, but it's even best if it's what they want to work on and what they want to get better at. Leveraging their strengths and growing their strengths to pull from positive psychology. So I think there needs to be a better balance in the corporate world. There's more of an understanding of, okay, we hire you, so you've got the skills, now do the job. Again, depends on who you're really hiring, and do they have all the skills? And then what happens when the job changes, right? We're working in this information age now where change happens all the time, faster and faster. But look at what just happened with COVID. Boom. Things were changing at this incredible pace, and now we have COVID, and boom, everything changes again instantly at the drop of a dime. So, do you have in place this way of building out these metacognitive skills with your people, so that they can respond to these types of changes? So, as an organization, you can respond to these types of changes to still produce the results. So, I think that's why you got to be splitting your time between developing your people intentionally and the results.